"You're useless, old man. Can't even pour your own water." She said it before the glass hit the floor. I didn't shout, didn't move, just watched the pieces catch the light. That slap wasn't about thirst, it was about power. By sunrise, she'd learn what silence can do. Before I tell you how it all turned around, hit subscribe and tell me which state you're listening from. I want to see how far this story travels. It was early February, one of those pale Midwest mornings where even the sunlight feels tired. The frost had made lace across the kitchen window, and the hum of the refrigerator was the only thing steady in that house. My daughter, Lydia, moved around in her robe like a guest who'd overstayed her welcome. The thing about her voice, she used to have her mother's softness. Rose would hum when she cooked, and Lydia used to hum right along with her when she was little. But after Rose passed, Lydia came home to help me, and the humming stopped. Replaced by sighs, instructions, and the sound of her scrolling through her phone. That morning I was sitting at the table in my flannel shirt, the one Rose had patched twice on the sleeve. I'd been up most of the night with a dry cough. My throat burned, my hands trembled slightly from the cold medicine. I remember staring at the glass on the counter, half full of yesterday's water. "Lydia," I said quietly, "could you pour me a fresh glass, please?" She didn't look up from her phone. "You've got two hands, Dad." Her voice was flat, almost bored. It wasn't cruelty in the obvious sense. It was something duller, like she'd stopped seeing me as a person. I tried again. "I will, sweetheart, my hand's shaking a little this morning." She set her phone down on the counter hard enough to make it rattle. "You're always shaking, you're always coughing. You act like I don't have my own life." I didn't respond right away. I'd learned that silence unsettles her more than words. Finally, I said, "I never asked you to give it up, just to help me through the winter." She turned toward me then. "Help you? I moved back into this house, sold my apartment, quit my job, and for what? To play nursemaid to a man? Who refuses to die?" That one hit the air like a frozen branch breaking. Even the refrigerator hum seemed to go quiet for a second. I looked at her, not angry, not even hurt, just tired. I said, "You should be careful with words like that, Lydia. They have a way of finding their way back." She rolled her eyes. "Don't start your old man wisdom crap, just drink your water and stop complaining." When I reached for the glass, it slipped from my hand. It wasn't far, maybe an inch, but enough to tip over and spill across the table. I flinched at the sound of it hitting the wood. The glass rolled off and shattered on the linoleum. She spun around like I'd shot a gun. "Oh, for God's sake." Then came the slap. It wasn't hard, not in the way it could have been, but it was real. A quick, impulsive, frustrated strike that said more than 1,000 arguments ever could. The sound echoed once, sharp against the kitchen tile. She froze immediately after. Her hand hovered halfway to her chest like she didn't quite believe what she'd done. I didn't speak, didn't move. Just turned my head slowly and looked at her the way a man looks at an empty field where something used to grow. "Dad," she whispered. "You made me—" I raised a hand, palm open. "Don't." She backed up a step. "It was an accident, Still calm, I said, "No. You meant it. It was just smaller than you expected." That's when she started crying, but I'd already stopped seeing her as my daughter in that moment. What I saw instead was a stranger standing in the same kitchen where Rose used to pour coffee, where Lydia once learned to tie her shoes. I walked past her, steady, quiet, like I was going out to the mailbox. She called after me, "Where are you going?" "Outside," I said. "Need some air?" The cold hit me like a blessing. The sky was the color of pewter, the kind of gray that holds no promise of change, only endurance. The neighbor, Mrs. Crane, was sweeping her porch across the street. She paused, squinting at me. "You all right, Tom?" she called out. I nodded once. Just needed a minute. She tilted her head, eyes sharp for a woman in her 70s. "Heard a ruckus. Everything okay in there?" I forced a small smile. "Depends who you ask." She frowned but didn't pry. She knew better than most that truth always finds its way to the surface in a small town. Back inside, Lydia had gone upstairs. The kitchen smelled faintly of lemon cleaner, like she'd wiped the counter out of guilt. The broken glass was gone, but the silence she left behind was heavier than before. I sat down again, the same spot, same light falling through the window. The empty space across the table felt like a warning. That's when I noticed it. The folder she'd left open on the counter. My name typed on a form, the words, "Power of Attorney," printed in bold. Her handwriting filled the witness line. Hers, and a name I didn't recognize. I read it twice before closing the folder. My pulse was steady, my thoughts clear. It wasn't just disrespect anymore. It was preparation. She'd been planning something long before that slap. And that's when I understood the slap wasn't a mistake, it was a slip of control. A preview of what she thought she owned. I folded the papers neatly, slid them into the drawer by the fridge, and poured myself another glass of water with my shaking hand. I drank it slow, the way you do before a long drive. Then I looked at the clock. The second hand ticked clean and certain. It was 9:17 a.m. on a cold Thursday morning when my daughter stopped being my caretaker and became my opponent. And I'll tell you this much. By the time spring rolled around, every document in that house would bear my signature again and hers would mean nothing. But that was only the beginning. As I sat there, the hum of the fridge steadying the silence, my mind went back, not to the slap, but to the years before. The trigger was simple, a faint creak from the floorboards above. Lydia's footsteps. The sound used to comfort me when she was a child. Every squeak meant she was home safe. Now it sounded like footsteps of entitlement walking over everything I'd built. I remembered the winter of '89, when she was 6, and Rose and I worked double shifts to pay her school tuition. I drove the snowplow at night, came home with salt caked in my beard, hands too cold to unlace my boots. Rose would be asleep on the couch with Lydia's school form spread across her lap. We'd saved every dime so that girl could go to college debt-free. When Lydia got her degree, she called me from Chicago. "Dad, I got the apartment," she'd said, crying with pride. I remember sitting on the porch, phone pressed to my ear, heart swelling like I'd won something too. I co-signed the lease, sent her $3,000 for furniture, and never told Rose I had to sell my fishing boat to do it. That's what fathers do. We trade dreams for stability, freedom for their comfort. Thought I was building her future. Turns out I was erasing mine, one signature at a time. Now seeing my name beneath her handwriting on that power of attorney, I understood the cruel symmetry of it. The girl I'd given everything to had used the same trust I taught her, as a weapon. Outside, the wind pushed against the windows. I looked at the frost melting on the glass and thought, some debts can't be paid back. They can only be corrected. And that night, I made a decision that would change everything. That night, after realizing what Lydia had done, I sat in the quiet until the clock struck midnight. The frost on the window had turned to fog, and I could see my own reflection faintly, a man who had worked his whole life to give someone else the tools to undo him. I didn't sleep. I just watched the faint blue of dawn crawl up the blinds, thinking about what Rose would have said if she'd seen our daughter that morning, maybe nothing at all. Rose had always believed that silence carried more truth than lectures ever could. By sunrise, I packed a small bag, a few clothes, my late wife's photograph, and the old folder with every deed, bank statement, and insurance form I could find. I didn't take much, just enough to remind me who I was before my own house stopped feeling like home. I left Lydia a note on the table. "Don't worry, you'll have the house to yourself for a while. Take care of it, the way you took care of me." I locked the door behind me, slow and deliberate, and walked out into the brittle cold. The air tasted cleaner than it had in months. I rented a small one-bedroom house on the edge of town, white siding, a squeaky screen door, and a narrow porch facing the cornfields. The kind of place you could disappear in without anyone asking. Too many questions. The landlord, a quiet man named Russell, handed me the keys with a nod. "It ain't fancy, but it's honest," he said. That night, I sat in the empty living room with a single lamp and a mug of weak coffee. The floors creaked, the pipes knocked, but it felt like peace. I laid my papers out on the kitchen table, old tax returns, the deed Rose and I had signed 30 years ago, and the life insurance policy Lydia didn't know existed. I organized them into stacks, labeling each with quiet precision. Every folder was a step back toward control. Every page was proof that I hadn't disappeared just because someone younger thought I should. Outside, the wind scraped against the window like it was urging me forward. I wasn't angry anymore, just awake. Tomorrow would be the first real step. The next morning I woke before dawn. The cold had crept into the house overnight, settling in the corners like a warning. I lit the small space heater, poured a cup of instant coffee, and spread my folders across the kitchen table again. Everything was right where I'd left it. Tidy, deliberate, waiting. The first real step wasn't anger. It was a phone call. I dialed the number for our First County Bank, the same branch where Rose and I had opened our first joint account in 1983. The line crackled before a woman answered. "First County, this is Karen speaking." "Morning, ma'am," I said evenly. "This is Thomas Ellison. I'd like to review my account activity for the last 6 months and remove an authorized signer." There was a pause long enough for me to picture her blinking at the screen. "Of course, Mr. Ellison. May I ask the reason for the removal?" "She's no longer authorized to act in my interest," I said. "Not legally, not personally." I could hear the careful professionalism in her tone. "Understood. We'll need to verify your ID in person, sir. Can you come in today? I'll be there before noon." When I hung up, the quiet felt purposeful. I gathered my ID, old checkbook, and that life insurance policy, the one Rose insisted we keep in my name only. The drive into town took 15 minutes past the frozen fields and a diner that hadn't changed since the 80s. Inside the bank, it smelled like coffee and copier ink. Karen recognized me instantly. She led me into a glass office, offered me a seat, and slid the forms across. My hands didn't shake this time. Each signature felt like a nail sealing a coffin I didn't have to dig. By the time I left, Lydia's name was gone from every account. I drove next to the county clerk's office, where a quiet young man helped me file a change to my power of attorney. "You'll want a notary stamp here," he said, tapping the line gently. "I will," I replied, pressing the pen down hard enough to leave an imprint through the next page. Back at the rental house, I filed everything in order. Bank first, then property deeds, then insurance. Each one had my name clean and unshared. For the first time in months, I felt my breath come easy. Not because I'd taken anything from her, but because I'd finally taken something back. I leaned back in my chair, listening to the wind scrape across the siding, and smiled faintly. Step by step, account by account, I was reclaiming everything that had been taken, not through anger, but through precision. Tomorrow, I'd make one more call, the one that would set everything else in motion. The next morning came gray and slow, like the world hadn't made up its mind whether to snow or rain. I sat by the small window of the rental house, watching a stray dog cross the frozen field behind the property. He didn't seem to be going anywhere, just walking, steady, the way you do when the road ahead doesn't frighten you anymore. The table beside me was stacked neat with folders and receipts, the quiet proof of everything I'd reclaimed. The air smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink, the scent of order. For the first time in a long while, I didn't feel like a burden to anyone. Across the street, Mrs. Crane was out early again, tossing birdseed along her porch rail. She waved when she saw me through the window. I raised my hand back. Her eyes lingered longer than usual, like she could sense something had shifted. The phone stayed silent all morning. No calls from Lydia, no apologies, no outbursts. Just quiet. I should have felt peace, and part of me did. But another part, the one that still remembered her as the little girl who used to bring me coffee in bed on Sunday mornings, felt something closer to emptiness. Still, I told myself, peace isn't the absence of noise. It's the absence of permission. By noon, a light snow began to fall, soft and slow. I watched it cover the road in white and thought, before silence becomes the only language left between me and what used to be called home, I should be ready for what comes next. And I had no idea just how soon it would come. That snowfall never really stopped. By the next evening, the whole town was muffled under it, the kind of stillness that makes even time hesitate. I was sitting at the small kitchen table, my folders stacked neatly by the lamp when the phone began to buzz against the wood. The sound startled me, not because it was loud, but because I already knew who it was. Lydia. 3 missed calls before I finally picked up. Dad? Her voice was low, shaky, the same tone she used years ago when she'd scrape her knee and try not to cry. I'm here, I said quietly. There was a pause, and I could almost hear her pulling herself together. Where are you? Safe. You can't just disappear like that, she snapped. The bills, the mail, I've been trying to handle everything. I smiled faintly to myself. Not anymore, you haven't. What's that supposed to mean? I let the silence do the talking, the kind that stretches out until the other person fills it with their own fear. Finally, she said, Dad, what did you do? Nothing you didn't already start, I answered. She exhaled hard. You're being dramatic. Lydia, I said, my voice steady as steel under cloth. Your name isn't on anything anymore. Not the bank, not the house, not my will. You don't speak for me, you don't sign for me, and you sure as hell don't hit me anymore. There was nothing on the line for a long moment, then a sharp inhale. You changed everything? Without even talking to me? You didn't ask before signing for me either. The line went dead. I stared at the receiver for a while, not angry, just certain. I knew that silence wouldn't last, it didn't. By morning, her car was in the driveway of the rental house, exhaust clouding in the cold air. She didn't even knock, just stormed in like she still owned something. Dad, what the hell did... You do? She demanded, snow melting into her hair. I was calm. I'd already set out 2 cups of coffee. You should close the door, Lydia. You're letting the heat out. Her eyes darted to the papers on the table, bank forms, notarized copies, and a sealed envelope addressed to my lawyer. She went pale. You've been planning this? I sipped my coffee. Since the morning you raised your hand to me. That was a mistake. You can't just cut me out of your life. Didn't have to, I said. You did that yourself. She blinked fast, tears already starting to form. I gave up my life for you, my job, my apartment. No, I interrupted softly. You traded them. You thought moving in gave you ownership. It didn't. It just showed me what I'd been too blind to see. She slammed her hand on the table. You don't get to talk to me like this. I looked her in the eye, steady. I'm not talking to my daughter right now. I'm talking to the person who tried to become my guardian without my consent. That stopped her. The room went still, except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. She swallowed hard. You're making me sound like a villain. You did that yourself, Lydia. All I did was put things back where they belonged. Her voice softened then, and for a second, I saw the little girl again. I thought you needed me. I did, I said gently. But what you gave wasn't help, it was control. She turned away, hands trembling. So what now? You just sit here alone and pretend you're better off? I let a small breath out, not quite a sigh. Better off? No, just honest. And that's enough. She wiped at her eyes, angry now that she was crying. You don't mean that. I stood slowly, walked to the window and pulled the curtain aside. The snow had eased, sunlight breaking faintly through the clouds. Lydia, I mean every word. You've got a chance to start over, but not here, not with me. What's left of my peace doesn't include being afraid of my own child. She turned to me, jaw trembling. So that's it? You just write me out? No, I said, still looking out at the light on the snow. I wrote the truth back in. The sound that came out of her was half laugh, half sob. She picked up her coat, pulled it tight, and for a second I thought she might apologize. Instead, she said, "You'll regret this, Dad. You always need someone eventually." I nodded once. "You're right, but I'd rather need a stranger than beg love from a hand that hits." She froze, eyes glistening, then turned and left. The screen door creaked shut and the sound lingered long after her footsteps disappeared into the snow. I stood there a while, just listening to the quiet. It wasn't victory I felt. It wasn't relief either. It was something steadier, like a man watching a storm move away across the fields. Mrs. Crane's voice called faintly from across the street. "Tom, you all right?" I raised a hand, managed a small smile. "Yeah, just clearing my head." She nodded knowingly, her scarf whipping in the cold. "Good. Some storms ain't meant to be waited out. They're meant to be survived." I smiled back. "That's about right." Inside, the house felt different now. Emptier, but honest. I poured the remaining coffee into the sink, rinsed the cup, and looked at my reflection in the window. For the first time in a long while, I saw a man standing on his own side of the glass. I picked up my coat, keys, and wallet. "Maybe breakfast at the diner'll help clear my head," I murmured. After all, every new chapter deserves a quiet beginning. The next morning, the light came early and honest, the kind that doesn't ask your permission to enter. I hadn't slept much, but I wasn't tired either. The air inside the rental house felt too still, so I pulled on my coat and stepped outside before the coffee finished brewing. Across the street, Mrs. Crane, Tom Crane's widow, was already outside, bundled in her thick wool coat, broom in hand, clearing a small path in the snow. Folks around here called her Tom, too, out of habit from all those years they were Tom and Margaret Crane, two names that used to come as a set. These days, though, she just went by Tom, said it kept her husband close. "Morning, Mr. Ellison," she said, leaning on her broom. "Early start?" "Couldn't sit still," I replied. "Mind some company on your walk?" She smiled, that small-town smile that means more than it looks. "Wouldn't mind it one bit." We started, down the road together, boots crunching through the snow. The sky was pale blue, the color of worn denim. Out here, even the air sounded different, cleaner somehow, quieter than thought. For a while we didn't talk. Then she said, "Saw your daughter's car out front yesterday. She looked worked up." I nodded. She was. "You two patch? Things up?" "Not exactly." She glanced sideways at me. "You did what you had to?" "I did what was fair," I said. "Sometimes those are the same thing." She nodded slowly. "Fair's not always kind." "No," I said, "but kindness without truth is just delay." We walked another few paces before she stopped and pulled a folded envelope from her coat. "Pocket." I didn't mean to snoop, but this came to my house by mistake yesterday. Mail truck must have mixed up the addresses, figured it was something important. I took it from her. My name printed neatly across the front, but not in Lydia's handwriting. The return address was from First County Bank. "Thanks," I said. She patted my arm. "Hope it's good news. Lord knows you've earned some." When I got back to the house, the coffee was still warm. I opened the envelope with a kitchen knife, careful not to tear it. Inside was a printed statement from the bank, something the clerk must have sent before my changes fully processed. At first it looked routine, deposits, withdrawals, transfers. But then a line caught my eye, an outgoing wire transfer for $18,000, dated 2 months prior. The recipient's name was Lydia Ellison, followed by the memo line, "Caregiver reimbursement." I blinked, checked again. The transaction was marked authorized. Only 2 signatures were required, mine and hers. My stomach turned cold. I dug out the older folder from the night before and started cross-referencing. There it was again, smaller amounts this time, spaced weeks apart. She hadn't just signed forms for my care. She'd been quietly paying herself from my retirement account. $18,000, Rose would have said. "That's not a mistake, Tom. That's a decision." I sat there for a long minute, listening to the wind whistle against the siding. the sound like a distant kettle left on too long. Then I called the bank again. It was the same clerk, Karen. "Good morning, Mr. Ellison," she said, warm and unsuspecting. "Karen," I began carefully. "I received a transaction notice this morning for a transfer to my daughter's account. Says I authorized it. I'd like to know exactly how." Her voice softened. "Give me a moment to pull that up." "All right." "Yes. I see it here." It was approved through a signed power of attorney form on file. Electronic verification. "Electronic?" I asked. "Yes, sir. It was signed digitally. Your name appears here. Timestamp from November 14th. My breath left me slow. "Karen, could you email me a copy of that document?" "Of course, Mr. Ellison. Would you like me to flag it for review as possible fraud?" I smiled faintly at the word possible. "Yes, let's call it that for now." When the file came through, I opened it on the old laptop I kept by the window. There it was. My signature, perfect in every stroke, except one small thing. I never signed with my middle initial. She had. It was enough. By noon, I'd already called the county clerk again, explaining the situation in the same calm tone I'd use if I were ordering breakfast. The clerk, a young man named Henson, remembered me from before. "Mr. Ellison, I can file this under unauthorized fiduciary use," he said. "But if she's family, I'd suggest starting with your lawyer first. It'll hold better in court that way." I nodded, though he couldn't see me. "Appreciate it, son." When I hung up, I sat back in my chair, the paper still open on the table. My pulse didn't rise. My hands didn't shake. It was strange. After all that, I didn't feel angry. I just felt clear. Lydia hadn't just betrayed me as a daughter. She'd forged her love into a ledger, and that ledger was going to close. Outside, the light shifted. The snow had started to melt, sliding off the porch roof in soft, steady drips. Across the street, Mrs. Crane, Tom, as she preferred, waved at me again, broom in hand, her quiet nod saying more than words could. I nodded back. Tomorrow I'd walk into the sheriff's office with evidence, not emotion. From that moment on, it wasn't family anymore. It was a case file. The next morning, the roads were still slick from melt and freeze, a thin crust of ice shining under the pale sun. I waited until the clock struck 9 before I picked up the folder from the table, the one that now held my daughter's digital betrayal in black and white. It felt strange carrying it, like walking with a gravestone under my arm. I slid on my old winter coat, the same one I'd worn when Rose and I used to take Sunday drives. The sleeves were frayed, but the fabric carried a kind of quiet strength, the kind you earn by outlasting storms, not outrunning them. Before I left, I poured a thermos of coffee and wrote one more note for myself. Evidence, not emotion. Then I stepped outside. The air bit hard, sharp as truth. My truck started on the first try, engine rumbling steady. The radio flickered on mid-song. "You can't hurry love." Irony so thick I almost laughed. The Mao Sheriff's Office sat just off Main Street next to the post office and across from the courthouse. It was the kind of place where everyone still said, "Morning," even if they didn't like you. Inside, the heater hummed loud, the air smelling faintly of coffee and winter coats. Deputy Henson, the same young man from the clerk's office, looked up when I entered. Recognition softened his face. "Mr. Ellison, guessing this isn't a social visit?" "Not today," I said, placing the folder on the counter. "Need to file a fraud report. Family matter." He nodded, careful not to look surprised. "You got proof?" "Plenty." He took the papers, flipping through with the methodical patience only small-town lawmen seem to have. I watched his eyes move across the forged signature, the dates, the transfer logs. He exhaled. "That's a clean copy of your name. Almost perfect." "Almost," I said. She added my middle initial. "I haven't used that since 1974. Gave a low whistle. "You sure you want to press this? It'll be a long process." "I'm sure," I said evenly. Long's fine. Long means legal. He smiled faintly at that. All right then, we'll take a statement, notarize it, and start a case file. You got a lawyer in mind? Already called one. He'll be here this afternoon. That lawyer, Mark Hanley, had been a quiet friend of mine since Rose's funeral. He wasn't loud, but he was steady. When he arrived, he shook my hand the way old men do when words would only cheapen the moment. Tom, he said, taking a seat beside me. I read your message. You did the right thing. I didn't do it for right or wrong, I said. Just truth, he nodded. Truth'll do. We spent the next hour filling out forms, line by line, date by date. Mark spoke with that slow, measured rhythm lawyers get from reading too much scripture and statute. You're not after money, he said. You're after record. That makes this cleaner. Money's replaceable, I said. Names aren't. Once the paperwork was filed, Henson gave me a copy of the report, stamped and dated. Case. Number 07215 BRAO. He slipped it across the desk like a quiet promise. Next step, he said. We'll send this to the state fraud unit. They'll verify digital records with the bank. She'll get a notice within 10 business days. Good, I said, standing. Let the mail do the talking for once. On the drive home, the truck heater wheezed against the cold, but I barely noticed. I stopped at the diner on the corner, the same one Rose used to love, and ordered the usual black coffee and rye toast. The waitress, Martha, poured without asking. Morning, Tom, she said softly. Haven't seen you since Christmas. How's the girl? I stirred my coffee, watching the ripples. Learning about consequences, I said. She nodded once, no judgment. World's best teacher, that one. Two men at the counter were talking low, not whispering, just small-town quiet. I caught a few words. Ellison's girl, bank trouble, forgery. I didn't turn around. In towns like this, you don't need to fight rumor. You just let it finish its own lap. Truth travels faster when you don't chase it. By the time I got home, Mrs. Crane was on her porch again, broom resting against the rail. Heard you. We're in town, she called out. Word travels fast. Truth usually does, she said, smiling. Inside, the house was still. The folder sat on the table, lighter now that its weight had been shared with the law. I poured another coffee and looked out across the fields. White, endless, clean. For the first time, I realized I wasn't alone anymore. The system, cold, slow, bureaucratic line, was finally on my side. I let it ring twice before answering. That night, the phone rang again. Lydia. I let it ring twice before answering. You filed something, she said, voice sharp. Yes. Her breath hitched. You can't do this to your own daughter. I stared out the window at the falling snow. I didn't do anything to you, Lydia. I just stopped letting you do it to me. She said something under her breath, too quiet to catch, then hung up. I made a note in the small ledger I kept beside the phone. Date, time, duration. Every detail mattered now. The next morning, Mark called. Tom, county's moving faster than expected. They've frozen the secondary accounts pending investigation. I smiled faintly. Guess winter came early for her. He chuckled. You really don't want retribution, do you? No, I said. Just correction. He paused, voice softening. Rose would have been proud. I looked out across the frost-coated fields, the horizon glowing faintly pink. Maybe, I said quietly, but she'd still tell me to pray for the girl. He didn't argue. He knew some prayers aren't meant to change others, just to keep your own hands clean. That afternoon, I went to the post office to send certified copies of the report to my bank and insurance agent. The clerk stamped them with that heavy thud that sounds like closure. As I stepped outside, I caught a reflection in the glass. My own face, calm, lined, resolute. A man no longer afraid of silence. In towns like this, truth doesn't hide long. By evening, even the pastor had called. Tom, he said gently. Folks are talking, but I told them what I know. You're not the kind to stir trouble. You're the kind that ends it. I thanked him, meaning it. Appreciate that, Reverend, just trying to live right by the paperwork. He laughed softly. Ain't that the modern gospel? That night I sat by the window with a pen in hand and the last of my coffee cooling beside me. The clock ticked steady, marking time not by seconds, but by peace. Everything from here on would be handled by paper, not pain. In towns like Haversfield, truth travels faster than rumor, and it doesn't stop. A week passed before the thaw came. Snow melted off the rooftops in slow sheets, revealing the dull brown of February underneath. In the Midwest, that's how change happens. Not in a rush, but in a slow, patient crawl you can almost mistake for stillness. I'd spent those days quietly, mornings with coffee and paperwork, evenings by the window, watching the light fade behind the fields. The sheriff's office had confirmed receipt of the bank's cooperation letter. The fraud claim was moving forward. My lawyer, Mark, said it could take months. That was fine. I'd waited through worse seasons. What I hadn't expected was the noise to come from outside the courthouse walls. It started small, a glance at the diner, a conversation that went silent when I walked in. I could feel it, that familiar shift in the air when gossip starts taking shape. Mrs. Crane told me first. Tom, she said one morning, broom in hand, you might want to know your daughter's been talking. I looked up from the porch steps. Talking? Word around town is you've lost your memory, that you don't know what you're signing anymore. I didn't answer right away. The wind caught her scarf and fluttered it like a flag between us. That's what she's going with, huh? Mrs. Crane nodded. People believe what makes them comfortable. You just keep steady, you hear? I've got no plans to wobble, I said. Still, it stung. Not because of what she said, but because Lydia knew exactly how to cut where it hurt. She wasn't just attacking my case, she was attacking my competence. By Friday, the whispers had stretched from the diner to the church. I walked into the hardware store for a bag of nails, and old Frank Milner, who'd known me 30 years, gave me that pitying smile folks reserve for the newly senile. Tom, he said softly, heard you've been having a rough go. If you need help keeping track of bills. I cut him off, but gently. I can still read, Frank, and sign my own name. He cleared his throat, embarrassed. Of course. Just checking in. I paid cash and left, but the damage was clear. Lydia had shifted the narrative from fraud to filial mercy. In small towns, stories don't need proof to grow. They just need repetition. Still, I stayed quiet. Silence has gravity. It pulls truth back down eventually. That Sunday, I went to church for the first time in months. The sermon was on temptation and truth. And halfway through, I caught Lydia's voice from behind me. I didn't turn around, just listened. She was telling the Johnsons that she'd been doing everything she could to help me, that I'd grown paranoid, confused, convinced everyone was stealing. Her voice cracked once for effect, soft and practiced. When service ended, she didn't expect me to be waiting by the door. Dad, she said, startled, her smile freezing halfway. You came. I did, I said calmly. Beautiful sermon, about truth. Her eyes darted. You shouldn't be alone. You know how people, I interrupted, can tell the difference between senility and silence. The difference is, one forgets, the other remembers too well. She looked around, lowering her voice. Please don't make a scene. I smiled faintly. I don't make scenes. I make records. I walked past her, hat in hand, while half the congregation pretended not to watch. That's the thing about small towns. They don't need a judge to hold court. They just need a parking lot and time. By midweek, the sheriff called. Tom, he said, just a heads up. Your daughter filed a counterclaim. Says you're not of sound mind, that she was only protecting your assets. I leaned against the kitchen counter, looking at the frost returning to the window. Let her file what she wants, Sheriff. The paper doesn't scare me. He chuckled. Didn't think it would. Just figured you should know before she tries to turn it into a pity parade. Appreciate the warning. That night the phone rang again, late, around 10. I almost didn't answer, but something in me said to. Dad? Her voice was softer now, weary, maybe rehearsed. Yes, Lydia. I'm sorry. The words came out fragile, like they were made of glass. I didn't mean for things to get this far. The money, I was just trying to pay myself back for helping you. You forged my name. She hesitated. You said I could use your account for groceries. It got mixed up. I made mistakes. $18,000 worth? Dad, please. I can't sleep. I've lost weight. I can't eat. I know. I shouldn't have done it, but I thought I'd lose you if I didn't stay in control. There it was, the emotional ambush, wrapped in guilt, tied with sincerity. I could almost hear her rehearsing it in a mirror somewhere. I stayed silent, for a long while. Silence is heavy over the phone. It makes people panic. Finally, I said, Lydia, I appreciate the apology, truly. But remorse doesn't undo a signature. The law doesn't trade on tears. She broke then, sobbing. I don't want you to hate me. I don't, I said simply. But love without respect isn't love at all. It's leverage. There was nothing left to say after that. I hung up gently, logged the call time, and wrote down every word she'd said. 2 days later, Mark came by with coffee and news. The investigator reviewed the bank's electronic log. They confirmed your suspicion. Your daughter's login credentials were used for every transfer. That's enough to move forward. I nodded. How long before she's notified? End of the week, maybe sooner. I looked out the window. The fields were wet now, patches of grass showing through the melt. Good, I said quietly. Let spring handle what winter started. Mark smiled faintly. You're taking this better than most men would. I've already buried the worst thing that could happen to me, I said. Everything else is paperwork. He understood, didn't argue. When he left, I made another pot of coffee, sat at the table, and opened my notebook. Every entry was dated, timed, and signed. Every call, every receipt, every false claim. The pages felt steady beneath my hand. The texture of control. By the weekend, the whispers in town started shifting. The same folks who'd pitied me were now whispering about the investigation. Someone at the courthouse must have talked. At the diner, I heard one of the Johnson boys mutter. Turns out he was right. His daughter forged everything. Martha, behind the counter, gave him a look sharp enough to cut rope. Maybe next time folks will remember who taught that girl manners. By Sunday, the pity in people's eyes had turned into something else. Respect. Maybe even apology. But I didn't need it. The truth had already done its work. That night, as the first frogs began their hesitant spring songs, I sat by the window and thought of Rose. She would have told me to forgive, not for Lydia's sake, but for my own. I wasn't there yet. Forgiveness takes longer than winter. But I was closer than I'd ever been. I opened the notebook one last time that night and wrote a final line at the bottom of the page. She cried. I listened and wrote everything down. Then I closed it, leaned back, and let the quiet settle around me. By Sunday morning, peace felt less like forgiveness and more like proof. By Monday morning, the air had changed. The snow was gone, leaving the world smelling like wet soil and new starts, a kind of clean that only comes after a long freeze. I'd just finished my coffee when my lawyer, Mark Hanley, called. Tom, he said, county's moved your hearing up. The judge wants both parties present this morning to confirm standing on the fraud report and the mental competency counterclaim. I let out a small breath. She's doubling down, huh? She's trying to, but I've seen the evidence. You'll be fine. Fine's all I ever wanted, I said. By 9:30, I was parked in front of the Haversfield courthouse, the same old brick building where Rose and I got our marriage license nearly 45 years ago. Funny how justice and life both begin in the same rooms and just under different names. The sky hung gray, the flag on the pole barely moving. Mrs. Crane was there too, standing by the sidewalk. She smiled when she saw me. "You're not alone. Today," she said softly. "Whole town's been watching." "I know," I said, pulling my coat tight. "Let's give them something honest to watch for once." Inside, the courthouse smelled like paper and old wood polish. Lydia was already there with her attorney, a young man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd never shoveled a driveway in his life. She didn't look at me, just fidgeted with a tissue, her eyes rimmed red for effect. Mark leaned close. "Remember, you don't have to say much. Just let the records speak." I nodded. Records have better manners than most people. When our case was called, the judge, an older woman with a voice steady as a gavel, looked between us. "Mr. Ellison, Mrs. Ellison, this hearing is to address conflicting claims, alleged financial fraud by the daughter, and a counterclaim of diminished capacity by the father. Do both sides understand?" I answered first. "I do, Your Honor." Lydia hesitated, then mumbled, "Yes." Mark handed over our folder. "Your Honor, we have notarized statements from the bank, digital signature analysis, and sworn verification from the sheriff's office confirming unauthorized access. You'll also find 3 recorded voicemails and a written summary of admissions." The young attorney cleared his throat. "Your Honor, my client maintains she acted out of concern, not malice. Her father's memory is sound," the judge interrupted, flipping through the papers. "These are meticulous. Every date, every transaction logged. I wish half my litigants were this organized." Lydia looked down, her fingers twisted, the tissue to threads. The judge continued, "Mrs. Ellison, you claim to act under implied consent, yet this document shows you added an unauthorized initial to your father's digital signature. Would you like to explain that?" Lydia opened her mouth, then closed it again. Her lawyer shifted uncomfortably. "No explanation?" The judge pressed. She whispered, "It was an accident." The judge's brow lifted. "An $18,000 accident?" The courtroom stayed silent, except for the faint ticking of the wall clock. Finally, the judge leaned back. "Mr. Ellison, I've read your logs. I see no indication of diminished capacity. You've documented everything with precision. The court finds your daughter's access unauthorized and recommends immediate restriction of all joint financial accounts. Do you wish to file for a protective order?" Mark looked at me, waiting. I nodded slowly. "Yes, Your Honor. I'd like a restraining order limiting her contact for now, until she can speak to me as my daughter, not my manager." The judge nodded approvingly. "Granted." She signed the papers, her pen scratching quietly across the page, the sound of peace being notarized. Lydia finally spoke, voice breaking. "Dad, please, you can't." I turned my head just enough to meet her eyes. "I didn't do this to you, Lydia. I did this for me." Her attorney touched her arm, guiding her away as she cried quietly into her hands. Outside the courtroom, Mrs. Crane was waiting near the steps. A few townsfolk had gathered too. The ones who'd whispered, all month. Frank from the hardware store, Martha from the diner, even Reverend Cole. She called out softly, "How'd it go, Tom?" I held up the stamped papers. "Truth's on record now." Frank nodded once, guilt flickering across his face. "Guess we should have trusted you sooner." I smiled faintly. "Guess I should have spoken sooner." The wind picked up just then, carrying a bit of warmth with it, the first real hint of spring. That evening, Mark and I sat in my kitchen, the restraining order lying between us like a quiet line in the sand. "She won't be able to access any of your accounts," he said. "The judge made it clear. One more infraction and it turns criminal." I nodded. "That's not what I wanted, Mark. I just needed the noise to stop." He sipped his coffee. "It stopped, Tom. You did it the right way. No shouting. No spectacle." I looked toward the window where dusk was turning the fields violet. Justice doesn't always need an audience, just a clerk and a pen. He smiled. "I'll make sure the papers get filed with the county by morning." After he left, I stepped outside for a moment. The ground was soft beneath my boots, the kind that holds footprints like it means to remember them. Across the street, Mrs. Crane was rocking on her porch swing, lamplight glowing behind her. "You done good, Tom," she said. "You didn't ruin her, you just stopped her." I nodded. "That's enough," she smiled. "That's more than most folks manage." The night settled quiet around us, a kind of peace that didn't need to be declared to exist. I went back inside, poured the last of my coffee, and stared at the papers one more time. Case number, court seal, restraining order granted. For the first time in months, the house didn't feel borrowed. It felt mine. By afternoon, protection had a case number and truth had witnesses. And when I finally turned off the light, the silence wasn't heavy anymore. It was earned. The morning after the hearing, I woke to birds. Real ones this time. Not the heavy silence of snow or the groan of wind through the siding, but soft, uncertain chirps testing the air. Spring had come to Haversfield in quiet steps. For the first time in months, I didn't feel watched. No calls, no letters, no tension in my shoulders. Just peace, or something close enough to pass for it. The restraining order sat on my table beside the morning paper, its official seal stamped like a quiet promise. The ink had barely dried, and yet I could already feel its weight working. Not as a weapon, but as a wall. I poured coffee, stepped out onto the porch, and breathed in the thaw. Across the street, Mrs. Crane waved from her rocker, her shawl draped over her shoulders like a flag of truce. "Feels different today," she called out. "It does," I said. "Like the world remembered how to breathe." She smiled. "It's what peace sounds like, Tom. You get used to it." I wished she'd been right, because peace, I've learned, doesn't last long when guilt still has keys. It was 2 weeks later, a soft, damp evening, when the first sign of trouble came back. A black SUV parked at the end of the gravel lane, lights off, engine running. I recognized the outline of the driver before I even stepped outside. Lydia. I didn't go out to meet her. I didn't yell or wave her away. I just stood by the window, phone in my hand, the court paper open on the table. I waited. After a minute, she stepped out, coat pulled tight, face half hidden in the twilight. She stood there in the mud, looking up at the house like she wasn't sure if she was welcome or condemned. Then she shouted, "Dad, please, just talk to me." I didn't move. "Dad, I made a mistake, okay? I need to explain, you're all I have left." Still, I said nothing, her voice cracked. "You don't have to call the cops, I just want to talk." That's when I lifted the phone. Not to answer, but to record. "Lydia," I said, loud, enough for the mic to catch it. "You're violating a restraining order, leave now." She froze, eyes wide. "You'd really do that to your own daughter?" "Not to you," I said quietly. "For me." She took a step closer, then stopped, realizing, "You're recording this." "Yes," I said, "so the truth doesn't have to argue anymore." Her face fell. She turned, got back into the SUV, and drove off into the dark. 5 minutes later, I emailed the video to Sheriff Henson Sue, subject line, "Violation, recorded at 8:42 p.m. No anger, no threats. Just the facts." By morning, he'd replied, "Got it, Mr. Ellison, we'll handle it." The next few days moved like clockwork. A deputy came by with a clipboard, asked me to sign a confirmation statement. Another call came from Mark, my lawyer. "They've reviewed the footage, that's a clear violation, Tom. She'll get a court summons, no arrest but a formal warning. Next time, it won't be a warning." "Next time," I said quietly, "there won't need to be one." Paused. "You still okay with all this? It's a hard thing watching your own blood go through legal channels." "I'm not watching her fall, Mark," I said. "I'm watching the truth stand up." He didn't argue, just said, "That's one hell of a way to put it." By mid-April, word spread, as it always does in towns like ours. Folks at the diner didn't whisper anymore. They nodded when I walked in, left coffee waiting on the counter. Respect had replaced pity. Still, there were nights I couldn't sleep. Not from guilt, that had burned away long ago, but from the ache of what family used to mean. Sometimes I'd remember Lydia as a child, sitting on my shoulders at the county fair, her laughter echoing across the crowd. I'd think of Rose beside us, smiling like she'd built the world herself. And I'd wonder where it all went sideways. But every time I opened that folder, the forged papers, the transfers, the lies, I remembered, it didn't go sideways. It went deliberate. Then came the second violation, a week after her. Warning. I came home from the diner to find an envelope wedged in my door frame. My name on the front, no return address. I didn't have to open it to know. Inside was a letter written in Lydia's hand. The words started kind, but by the second paragraph they curved sharp. Blame disguised as grief, apology mixed with accusation. You've turned everyone against me. You've made me look like a thief when I was just trying to care for you. If you'd been a better father, maybe I wouldn't have had to take control. At the bottom, a postscript in small, shaky handwriting. You'll regret this when I'm gone. I read it once, then took a photo of it, time-stamped, and sent it straight to Henson. His reply came 20 minutes later. Don't worry, Tom. We've got it documented. That's enough for escalation. We'll handle it. The next morning, he showed up in person. We took her in last night, he said gently. Breach of order. She'll get evaluated and fined. Might do her good to slow down a while. I stood in the doorway, the cool air brushing my face. Thank you, Sheriff, you did right. He nodded, tipping his hat. No, sir, you did. You never raised your voice, you're just your standards. That's rare these days. By the time he left, the sun had started to rise over the fields. The light fell through the bare trees, golden clean. I stood there for a long while, watching it creep across the porch. Inside, the letter still lay on the table, beside the restraining order and case file. Together, they looked less like weapons and more like gravestones, markers of what once mattered, now laid to rest. I picked up Rose's photograph from the shelf, the one of her laughing by the lake, hair tangled in the wind. It's done, I said softly. She can't hurt anyone anymore, not even herself. The room stayed still, but it felt like something eased. A long-held breath finally exhaled. Justice hadn't knocked loud. It had shown up quietly, with paperwork and patience. And I realized then, I didn't win. I just stopped losing. A month passed after the violation, and the seasons turned without asking permission. The fields behind my rental house had gone from pale gold to deep green, the smell of soil and cut grass replacing frost and silence. I spent most mornings on the porch, coffee steaming beside me, Rose's picture framed in sunlight. For the first time in a long while, the world felt steady. Not happy, maybe, but honest. Then one morning the phone rang. It was Mark Hanley, though, my lawyer. His tone was careful, like a man walking on glass. Tom, there's been a development. Lydia's attorney reached out. She's asking for a private meeting. No press, no courtroom, just the two of you. I didn't answer right away. The sound of the wind through the cornfield filled the silence. What for? She says she wants to apologize. Maybe explain herself. I told them I'd run it by you first. I stared out at the porch rail where sunlight caught the chipped paint. Tell her I'll meet her, but not here, not at the house. Where then? The diner, I said. Public enough for decency. Quiet enough for truth. Mark exhaled, softly. You sure? I've been sure since the day she forged my name. The diner hadn't changed much. Same Formica tables, same jukebox that hadn't worked since '98. Martha was behind the counter, giving me that knowing look. She saved for moments like this. She's in the corner booth, she said, sliding me a cup of black coffee. You want me to keep an eye? I smiled faintly. If things go sideways, you'll hear it in my tone, not my voice. She nodded. Understood. Lydia sat by the window, dressed simple, pale sweater, hair pulled back, no makeup. She looked older somehow, thinner around the eyes. When she saw me, she stood up fast, nervous. Dad, she said. Thanks for coming. I nodded once, took the seat across from her. Let's skip the ceremony, Lydia. You asked to talk. She clasped her hands together, eyes darting to the coffee between us. I'm sorry for everything. For the money, the lies, the way I treated you. I wasn't myself. Then who were you? I asked quietly. Her eyes filled quick. I thought if I controlled everything, I could protect you. After Mom died, I panicked. You seemed lost. I was scared you'd let everything fall apart. I looked down at my cup, then back at her. So you forged my name, emptied my account, and slapped your own father. That's how you show protection? Tears slipped down her face. I know I deserve everything that's happened. I just wanted you to hear it from me before you closed the door completely. I let her cry. Didn't reach for her hand. Didn't scold her either. I'd learned by now. Silence says more than pity ever could. When she finally steadied herself, I asked, Do you remember what I told you that morning after your mother's funeral? She blinked, confused. What? I said grief will make you believe control is love, but it's not. It's fear in nicer clothes. She looked away. You were right. I usually am, I said softly. Just takes folks a while to notice. That made her smile a little through the tears, the kind of smile that comes from remembering who you used to be. I reached into my jacket then and pulled out an envelope. Here, I said, sliding it across. She frowned. What's this? The final draft of my will. It's already signed and notarized. Her breath hitched. You changed it again? Not again, I said. For good. She hesitated before opening it, scanning the first few lines. I watched her expression shift as she realized. You left everything to the community center? Yep. Rose's scholarship fund. They'll turn our land into a garden and a reading room, something that grows without greed. Her voice dropped to a whisper. You didn't leave me anything. I left you truth, I said. And my name, cleared and clean. That's more than I had when you walked out. She stared down at the papers. You're cutting me out completely. No, I said gently. I'm setting you free. There's a difference. Her tears came again, slower this time. I don't know how to fix this. You don't, I said. You just stop breaking it. For a long time, we sat there in the quiet hum of the diner. The coffee cooled between us. Outside, the afternoon light fell soft through the window, dust motes turning in slow motion. Finally, she stood, folding the papers back into the envelope. I'll sign whatever you need, she whispered. And I'll stay away if that's what you want. I looked up at her, really looked at her. And for the first time in years, I saw the little girl who used to bring me dandelions from the yard. What I want, I said quietly, is for you to tell the truth, and not to me, but to yourself, about what you did and why. She nodded, swallowing hard. I can try. That's all I ever asked, I said. She started to walk away, then stopped at the edge of the booth. Do you hate me? I took a breath, slow and deliberate. No. I just don't trust you. And love without trust is like planting seeds. Insult. She nodded once, tears shining again. Goodbye, Dad. Goodbye, Lydia. She left the diner quietly. Through the window, I watched her step into the sunlight, shoulders slumped but lighter somehow, as if the weight of her own lies had finally started to slide off. I finished my coffee, folded the napkin neatly, and left a few dollars on the table. Martha caught my eye as I passed the counter. You okay? She asked softly. Yeah, I said. Just lighter than I've been in a long time. When I stepped outside, the breeze carried the smell of rain and lilacs. Somewhere far off, thunder rumbled, the kind that doesn't warn, just rolls. Maybe that was forgiveness and not a feeling, but the sound of distance between hurt and healing. As I walked back toward the truck, I whispered under my breath, Forgiveness is free. Trust has interest. And for the first time since Rose died, I felt something close to peace. Summer settled over Haversfield like a long exhale. The fields rippled gold under the sun, and the air hummed with cicadas. That slow, patient sound of life continuing, no matter what's been lost. It had been 3 months since that meeting at the diner. I hadn't heard from Lydia again. No letters, no calls. No pleas, just quiet, the kind that doesn't ache anymore. In that silence, something unexpected started to grow. The Mal Community Center project had taken shape faster than anyone predicted. Rose's old garden, the one she'd planted, behind our farmhouse years ago, became the cornerstone of it all. The local paper ran a small story. Ellison Family Land donated for Public Garden and Learning Center, in memory of Rose Ellison. I didn't ask for that headline, but when I saw it printed, it felt right. That name, Ellison, meant something again. Not money, not ownership, just roots. Mrs. Crane came by almost every morning that summer, leaning on her cane, watching the volunteers work the soil. Kids from the high school painted benches, while a retired carpenter from the next town over built a little gazebo where Rose's lilac bush used to grow. "You ever think you'd see this place alive again?" she asked one morning, smiling. At the sound of laughter from the garden, I shook my head, coffee mug warm in my hands. I thought it'd all die with her. But I guess things don't end. They just change gardeners. She chuckled softly. That's a sermon right there. I looked out at the rows of tomato plants, the neat lines of flowers, and the small wooden sign painted by hand. Rose's Haven. For the first time in years, the air around that property didn't carry tension. It carried purpose. A week later, the town council asked if I'd attend the dedication ceremony. I almost said no. I wasn't one for speeches or attention. But Mark convinced me. "You started it," he said. "Might as well see how it ends." So I went. The day was bright, the sky clean as glass. The crowd wasn't large, but it was warm. Old friends, neighbors, and a few folks I'd thought had written me off. Even Frank from the hardware store stood near the back, hat in hand. The mayor spoke first, short and polite. Then the pastor offered a prayer, his words simple and steady. When they called my name, I hesitated a moment before stepping up to the small wooden podium. I didn't bring notes, didn't need any. "I won't keep you long," I began. "This land once held a family garden. My wife planted every seed, by hand, tomatoes, sunflowers, roses. She used to say that planting was just another way of keeping faith." I paused, looking out at the rows of faces. Some smiling, some tearful, some ashamed. I lost that faith for a while. Lost myself too. But truth has a way of growing back even in hard soil. I looked toward the garden, the lilacs swaying in the breeze. This place isn't about me. It's about what comes after pain, what grows when pride finally gets out of the way. The crowd was silent, not heavy but respectful, like the hush before rain. Then from the back, a movement caught my eye. Lydia. She stood near the fence, hands folded in front of her, eyes red but clear. She looked smaller somehow, humble in a way I'd never seen. For a moment the world narrowed, just her and me and all that unspoken time between us. I gave a small nod. Not approval, not invitation, just acknowledgement. She nodded back, lips trembling, eyes shining. The pastor stepped up then, his voice carrying over the crowd. "Before we close, I'd like to share something," he said. "Miss Ellison has asked to say a few words." A ripple of whispers passed through the group. I felt every heartbeat in my chest as she stepped forward, paper shaking slightly in her hands. She glanced at me, then began. "I wasn't asked to speak here today," she said softly, "but I wanted to, because this place, this garden, it isn't just about life growing again, it's about truth, and I haven't been truthful in a long time." The crowd hushed. Even the cicadas seemed to stop. "I hurt my father," she said. "Not just with words or actions, but with betrayal. I lied. I took what wasn't mine. And for a long time I told myself it was love, that control was care. But it wasn't, it was fear and pride." She swallowed hard, tears rolling freely now. My father gave me everything. His time, his trust, his silence, and I mistook that silence for weakness. But it wasn't. It was strength. The kind that waits for the truth to do its own work. She lowered the paper slightly, looking right at me. Dad, I'm sorry. Not for being caught, but for being lost. Thank you for letting me find my way back, even if it's from a distance. She stepped back, trembling, and the pastor placed a hand on her shoulder. No one clapped, not out of rudeness, but out of respect. The kind of silence you reserve for sacred things. When it was over, I didn't walk toward her, and she didn't come toward me. We just stood there, two people on either side of a truth finally spoken, and maybe that was enough. That evening, after everyone left, I walked the garden path alone. The air was soft and golden, the sound of crickets rising. Under the fading light, I stopped by the gazebo where the lilacs grew, the scent sweet and thick in the air. Someone had left a note there, pinned beneath a small stone. It was from Lydia. I'm leaving town for a while. I need to learn who I am when I'm not trying to fix everything. I hope you visit the garden often. Mom would have loved what you did here. Thank you for giving me the space to become someone you can be proud of someday. I read it twice, folded it carefully, and slipped it into my pocket. Then I sat on the bench beneath the lilacs and watched the sun go down over Rose's Haven. The light caught on the leaves, turning everything gold, even the shadows. For the first time in years, I didn't feel the need to look back. The truth finally had a home, and it wasn't mine anymore. By late August, the fields were tall again, gold and humming. The crickets had taken up their nightly choir, and the days stretched long and forgiving. I spent most evenings on the porch with a cup of coffee, watching the sun sink behind Rose's Haven. What used to be our land, now alive with laughter and green. Some nights I'd hear kids running through the garden paths, chasing fireflies under the gazebo where the lilacs grew. Their joy sounded easy, like the kind that comes from innocence unspoiled. I'd close my eyes and listen, because sometimes peace doesn't come from forgetting, but from remembering softly. A letter came one morning, forwarded through. Marked the return address was a women's recovery program in Minnesota. I didn't have to open it to know, but I did anyway. Dad, I'm doing better. I got a job helping with the admin office here. Paperwork of all things. You'd laugh at that. The program director says, healing is just honesty with patience. I think I'm starting to understand what you meant by that. I won't ask for forgiveness yet. I just want you to know I'm trying to be someone Mom wouldn't cry over. I hope the garden's growing. Love, Lydia. The letter trembled a bit in my hands, not because I was sad, but because something in me finally unclenched. I folded it carefully, slid it between the pages of Rose's old Bible, and whispered, "That's enough." That evening, I drove down to the garden. The sun was low, painting the sky in long ribbons of pink and gold. A few volunteers were still out, kids pulling weeds, an old couple watering the roses near the fence. I walked to the bench under the lilacs and sat down. The air smelled like earth and forgiveness. I thought about how everything had changed, the house, the town, the family, and yet somehow it all led right here. I'd spent so long chasing fairness, proof, and order, but the truth is, justice had never been about winning. It had been about surviving with my soul intact. Now, sitting there under the soft rustle of leaves, I realized something I hadn't before. Silence isn't emptiness. It's the sound of peace catching its breath. As dusk deepened, the first fireflies blinked over the rows of tomatoes. I imagined Rose beside me, her hand resting over mine like it used to, her voice a whisper just above the wind. You did it the right way, Tom. Quiet, honest, lawful. I smiled. You always like things neat, I said aloud. A small bird landed, On the rail in front of me, a robin, chest bright and bold. It stayed just long enough to tilt its head as if to say, "You can rest now." Then it flew off toward the horizon, disappearing into the last light of day. I sat a while longer, feeling the warmth fade from the air. My thoughts drifted to Lydia, not to what she'd done, but to what she might still become. People talk about forgiveness like it's a grand moment, but really, it's a slow letting go, a steady loosening of the rope around your own heart. When I finally stood to leave, I looked back at the garden, the lilacs swaying, the lights glowing faintly along the path. And I realized something Rose used to say was true. Peace doesn't arrive with trumpets. It walks in barefoot. I drove home with the windows down, the summer air thick with the scent of cut hay and wild clover. The moon rose slow over the fields, silver and sure. Inside the house, I set the coffee pot for morning, hung my hat on the same hook as always, and paused at the window. The reflection staring back wasn't the same man who once asked for water and got a slap in return. He was older, smaller maybe, but whole. I turned off the lamp, the glow from the moon spilling across the floorboards. In that quiet, I whispered, to no one in particular, maybe Rose, maybe Lydia, maybe the silence itself. It had been worth the wait. Peace came softly, like the evening light on the lake. If this story moved you, please like the video, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments below. To hear the next story, click the box on the left. Thank you for listening, and remember, justice doesn't always speak loud. Sometimes it just breathes quiet.